The morning sun cast long shadows across the prestigious Silverstone racing circuit as members of a British royal family gathered for what was meant to be a casual charity racing event. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense attitude and dedication to royal duties, had arrived early that Saturday morning. She wore a simple blue blazer and comfortable shoes, her hair neatly pulled back as always. The event was organized to raise funds for youth motorsports programs, and several members of the extended royal family had been invited to attend. Among the attendees was Tom Parker Bowles, Queen Camilla's son from her first marriage. Tom had always been passionate about fast cars and racing. He had spent months preparing for this event, eager to showcase his driving skills in front of family and friends. His racing vehicle, a sleek silver sports car with racing modifications, sat gleaming in the paddock area. The car's engine had been tuned to perfection. Tom couldn't hide his excitement as he walked around it, checking every detail. The atmosphere at the circuit was relaxed and festive. Colorful banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, and the smell of fresh coffee and pastries wafted from the hospitality tents. Families with children wandered around, taking photos and admiring the various racing vehicles on display. Security personnel in dark suits moved quietly through the crowds, their trained eyes constantly scanning for any potential issues. Among them was Officer James Mitchell, a Royal Protection Officer with 15 years of experience. James had protected various members of the royal family throughout his career, but today he was specifically assigned to ensure Princess Anne's safety. James was a tall man, with sharp features and graying hair at his temples. His military background had taught him to remain alert at all times, and he took his responsibilities seriously. As he stood a respectful distance behind Princess Anne, he observed everything around them. He watched the mechanics working on cars, the photographers jostling for position, and the excited children pointing at the racing vehicles. His training had taught him that danger could come from anywhere, often from the most unexpected sources. Princess Anne moved through the paddock with her characteristic grace and efficiency. She stopped to chat with young racing enthusiasts, asking them about their dreams and aspirations. She examined the safety equipment on display, nodding approvingly at the helmets and fire-resistant suits. Her genuine interest in the sport was evident to everyone present. She had always been an advocate for proper safety measures in all sporting activities, especially those involving high speeds and potential risks. Tom Parker Bowles was busy giving interviews to journalists who had gathered to cover the royal attendance at the event. He spoke enthusiastically about his love for racing and his hopes for the charity initiative. His racing suit, emblazoned with sponsor logos, made him look every bit the professional driver. Between interviews, he kept glancing at his car, eager to get behind the wheel and feel the rush of adrenaline that came with high-speed racing. The event organizers had planned a demonstration run where several participants, including Tom, would take their vehicles around the track at moderate speeds. It was meant to be a safe, controlled display for the spectators. The track had been inspected that morning, and all safety protocols had been reviewed. Medical personnel and fire crews were stationed at strategic points around the circuit. Everything seemed perfectly organized and under control. As the morning progressed, Princess Anne made her way toward the viewing area near the track. She wanted to watch the demonstration runs and show support for the participants. James Mitchell followed her closely, his eyes never resting on any one thing for too long. He noticed Tom Parker Bowles climbing into his racing vehicle, adjusting his helmet and gloves. The car's engine roared to life, sending a deep rumble through the air that made nearby spectators jump with excitement. Several other vehicles lined up on the track, the drivers ready for the demonstration. The announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeakers, explaining the format of the display and thanking everyone for their support of the charity. Children pressed against the safety barriers, their faces lit up with wonder. Parents held up phones and cameras, ready to capture the moment their children met real racing cars up close. Princess Anne stood near the pit lane entrance, a designated safe zone where officials and VIP guests could get a closer look at the action. The area was separated from the track by sturdy barriers and safety fencing. James Mitchell positioned himself between the princess and the track, his body angled in a way that would allow him to react quickly if needed. Years of training had made such positioning instinctive for him. Tom's silver racing car moved forward, joining the queue of vehicles preparing to enter the track. The The sound of multiple engines created a symphony of mechanical power that thrilled the crowd. Tom raised his hand in a wave toward the viewing area, though with his helmet visor down, it was impossible to see his expression. His car had been fitted with all the necessary safety features, including a roll cage, 5-point harness, and fire suppression system. On paper, everything was as safe as it could be. The first few cars rolled out onto the track, maintaining a steady pace as planned. The crowd cheered and applauded. Everything was proceeding smoothly, exactly as the organizers had envisioned. Princess Anne smiled, clearly enjoying the spectacle and the enthusiasm of the young people around her. She turned to make a comment to one of the event organizers standing nearby, gesturing toward the track with an appreciative nod. James Mitchell's attention never wavered. He watched Tom's car as it approached the pit lane exit, ready to join the others on the track. Something about the vehicle's movement caught his eye. The car seemed to be accelerating more quickly than the others had. The engine note changed, becoming higher and more aggressive. James's pulse quickened slightly. His years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts. And right now, those instincts were telling him something wasn't right. Tom's car burst onto the track with unexpected speed. Instead of the moderate pace the other vehicles had maintained, his car was moving significantly faster. The rear tires kicked up small bits of rubber and debris. The crowd's cheers grew louder, mistaking the increased speed for intentional showmanship. Some people even applauded, thinking Tom was putting on an extra display for the spectators. But James Mitchell knew better. The car was accelerating too quickly, and its trajectory seemed slightly off. Within seconds, he realized that Tom had lost control of the vehicle. Whether it was a mechanical failure, a pedal malfunction, or driver error, the result was the same. The silver racing car was heading directly toward the pit lane area where Princess Anne stood, and it was gaining speed with every passing moment. Time seemed to slow down for James. He saw the car's front. Wheels turned slightly, but not enough to correct its course. He saw people in the crowd beginning to realize something was wrong, their expressions changing from excitement to confusion and then to alarm. He saw Princess Anne still facing away from the approaching danger, unaware of the threat bearing down on her position. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to act, and act immediately. James Mitchell's body moved before his mind fully processed the decision. His 15 years of protection training compressed into a single moment of pure reaction. His right arm extended toward Princess Anne, while his left hand reached for his radio, already beginning to shout a warning to other security personnel. But there was no time for proper protocol or radio communication. The racing car was closing the distance at an alarming rate, and Princess Anne remained completely unaware of the danger. In 3 powerful strides, James crossed the space between his position and where Princess Anne stood. His hand connected with her shoulder, and with a firm but controlled motion, he pulled her backward into the side. The princess let out a surprised gasp as she was suddenly yanked away from where she had been standing. Her first reaction was confusion and perhaps a flash of indignation at being so roughly handled. But James didn't have time to explain or apologize. The silver racing car shot past the exact spot where Princess Anne had been standing just a fraction of a second. The vehicle was so close that James could feel the rush of air it displaced and smell the hot rubber of its tires. The sound was deafening, a roar of engine and wind that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. Tom's car missed them by perhaps 2 feet, maybe less. It was the kind of narrow margin that separated life from potential tragedy. Several spectators screamed as they finally understood what was happening. Parents grabbed their children and pulled them back from the barriers. Other security officers began running toward the scene, speaking urgently into their radios. The event organizers stood frozen in shock, unable to process how quickly the situation had deteriorated from a pleasant charity event to a near-dash catastrophe. Tom Parker Bowles fought desperately with the steering wheel inside the car, trying to regain control. His training kicked in, and he avoided slamming on the brakes, which would have sent the car into an uncontrollable spin. Instead, he attempted to steer toward an open area of the track, away from people and structures. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized how close he had come to causing a terrible accident. Sweat poured down his face inside the helmet. and his hands gripped the wheel with such force that his knuckles turned white. The car continued its wild trajectory across the paddock area. It clipped a stack of tires that had been placed as part of the track decoration, sending them bouncing in different directions. One tire rolled toward a group of photographers, who scattered quickly to avoid it. The vehicle then scraped against a metal barrier with a grinding screech that made everyone within earshot wince. Sparks flew from the contact point, creating a brief shower of orange light. James kept his body between Princess Anne and the careening vehicle, ready to move again if necessary. His training had prepared him for many scenarios, but this was unfolding with frightening speed. He could hear Anne's rapid breathing behind him and felt her hand grip his arm. Finally understanding the severity of what had just happened, other security personnel reached their position, forming a protective circle around the princess while keeping their eyes on Tom's car. The vehicle finally began to slow down as Tom managed to regain partial control. He steered it toward a gravel runoff area that was designed to help slow racing cars in emergency situations. The car's wheels hit the gravel, and the sudden change in surface friction helped reduce its speed dramatically. Stones and dust flew up around the vehicle, creating a cloud that temporarily obscured it from view. The awful grinding sound of metal and gravel filled the air, mixing with the gasps and shouts of the crowd. When the car finally came to a complete stop, an eerie silence fell over the circuit. For a moment, nobody moved. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see if there would be any further developments. The medical team and fire crew rushed toward Tom's car, their training taking over despite the shock of what they had just witnessed. They needed to ensure the driver was unharmed and that there was no risk of fire or other secondary dangers. Tom sat in the driver's seat, his hands still gripping the wheel, even though the car had stopped. His breathing came in heavy gasps inside the helmet. He could feel his heart racing so fast he thought it might burst from his chest. The realization of what could have happened, what almost happened, crashed over him like a physical wave. He had nearly injured, or worse, killed Princess Anne, a senior member of the royal family. The thought made him feel sick to his stomach. Medical personnel reached the car, began checking on Tom. They opened the door carefully and helped him remove his helmet. His face was pale and covered in sweat. His hands shook as he tried to undo his safety harness. One of the medics gently pushed his hands aside and unfastened the belts, speaking to him in calm, reassuring tones. They helped him out of the vehicle and immediately began checking for injuries. Tom kept trying to look back toward where Princess Anne had been standing, his eyes searching desperately through the crowd. Back at the pit lane area, James Mitchell finally allowed himself to take a full breath. His heart was still racing from the adrenaline surge, but his professional training kept his voice steady as he spoke into his radio, giving a full situation report to the security command center. Other officers were already beginning to secure the area and organize the evacuation of spectators from the immediate vicinity. The event would obviously need to be suspended while investigators determined. What had gone wrong? Princess Anne straightened her blazer and took a moment to compose herself. Her face showed remarkable calm considering what had just occurred. This was not the first dangerous situation she had faced in her decades of royal service, and her military background had taught her to remain composed under pressure. However, her hands trembled slightly as she brushed a strand of hair from her face. Betraying the shock she felt beneath her composed exterior, she turned to James Mitchell, and their eyes met. In that moment, a silent communication passed between them. Anne was known for her directness and her ability to assess situations quickly. She understood immediately that James's quick action had likely saved her from serious injury or worse. His split-second decision to grab her and pull her to safety, despite the breach of normal protocol it represented, had been absolutely necessary. The event organizers rushed over, their faces pale with worry and guilt. They began apologizing profusely, explaining that they had checked everything, that all safety measures had been in place, that they couldn't understand what had gone wrong. Princess Anne raised her hand to stop their anxious explanations. She spoke in her characteristic firm but kind voice, telling them that accidents can happen despite the best preparations, and that what mattered now was ensuring Tom was unharmed and determining what had caused the malfunction. Media photographers who had been covering the event had captured much of the incident on camera. The clicking of camera shutters filled the air as they documented the aftermath. Video footage from multiple angles would later be analyzed to understand exactly what had happened. News organizations around the world would soon be reporting on the close call at the charity racing event, and James Mitchell's name would become known to millions of people. Tom Parker Bowles, having been cleared by the medical team for any physical injuries, insisted on speaking to Princess Anne immediately. Security personnel initially tried to keep them separated while the investigation proceeded, but Anne overruled them. She wanted to speak with Tom, to reassure him, and to understand from his perspective what had occurred. She was not the type of person to hold grudges or to blame someone for an accident, especially when mechanical failure might have been involved. As Tom approached, supported by one of the event organizers, his distress was evident. His racing suit was dusty from the gravel, and his hair was matted with sweat. He looked much younger than his years, like a child who had made a terrible mistake. Before anyone could stop him, he began apologizing, his voice cracking with emotion. He explained that the accelerator had stuck, that he had tried everything to slow the car down, that he had never felt so terrified in his life. Princess Anne listened patiently, then surprised everyone by stepping forward and placing a reassuring hand on Tom's arm. She told him that she was grateful he was unharmed, that these things happen in motorsports, and that the important thing was that everyone was safe. Her grace under pressure and her immediate concern for Tom's well-being despite her own close call demonstrated the character that had made her one of the most respected members of the royal family. James Mitchell watched this exchange while maintaining his professional vigilance. Other security officers had formed a wider perimeter, and police were beginning to arrive to secure the scene and begin their investigation. The crowds were being moved back to safe areas, and announcements over the loudspeakers informed everyone that the event was being postponed indefinitely. Children cried in disappointment, not fully understanding why the fun day had been cut short. Investigators would later determine that a mechanical failure in Tom's car had caused the throttle to stick open. A small component had broken, preventing the accelerator pedal from returning to its normal position. It was the kind of rare malfunction that could happen despite thorough pre-event inspections. The car had passed all safety checks that morning, but the part had failed at the worst possible moment. Tom was cleared of any wrongdoing, though the emotional impact of the incident would stay with him for a long time. The royal family's press office issued a brief statement later that day, confirming the incident and praising the quick action of the protection officer. They emphasized that Princess Anne was completely unharmed, and that she bore no ill will toward Tom Parker Bowles. The statement was characteristically understated, not dwelling on the drama, but focusing on the facts and the positive outcome. The aftermath of the incident unfolded over the following days and weeks, touching the lives of everyone involved in unexpected ways. James Mitchell found himself thrust into a spotlight he had never sought and certainly never wanted. His job had always been to remain invisible, a shadow that protected without drawing attention. Now, his face was on the front pages of newspapers across the United Kingdom and around the world. Headlines praised his lightning-fast reflexes and dedication to duty, calling him a hero and crediting him with saving Princess Anne's life. James returned to his small flat in London that evening. After giving statements to multiple investigators and security officials, he lived alone, having divorced several years earlier. The quietness of his home was a welcome relief after the chaos of the day. He made himself a cup of tea and sat in his favorite armchair, finally allowing himself to process everything that had happened. His hands, which had remained steady throughout the entire ordeal, began to shake slightly as the adrenaline fully left his system. The reality of how close he had come to failing in his duty hit him hard. What if he had been looking in a different direction for just 1 second longer? What if he had hesitated even briefly before acting? What if his reflexes had been a fraction slower? These questions cycled through his mind, keeping him awake late into the night. Other protection officers might have celebrated their successful intervention, but James could only think about the narrow margin. Between success and tragedy, his phone rang constantly over the next few days. Journalists wanted interviews, former colleagues called to congratulate him, and his supervisors scheduled multiple meetings to debrief the incident. James declined all media requests. He had signed confidentiality agreements as part of his role, but beyond that, he genuinely had no interest in personal publicity. He had simply done his job, he told anyone who asked. Any protection officer in his position would have done the same thing. Princess Anne, however, had different plans. She was not a woman who believed in leaving debts of gratitude unpaid. Despite her busy schedule of royal engagements, she made arrangements through her private secretary to personally thank James. A formal letter of commendation was prepared for his personnel file, but it insisted on something more personal as well. She wanted to meet with him privately, away from the cameras and official ceremonies. The meeting was arranged at one of the smaller royal residences, a quiet location where they could speak without interruption. James arrived in his best suit, feeling more nervous about this private meeting than he had about any of the dangerous situations he had faced in his career. A staff member led him through elegant hallways decorated with historical portraits and antique furniture. The buildings smelled of old wood and lavender polish, carrying with it the weight of centuries of royal history. Princess Anne received him in a comfortable sitting room that felt surprisingly informal. She was dressed casually in a simple sweater and trousers, and she gestured for him to sit in a chair opposite her own. Tea and biscuits were already prepared on a small table between them. For a moment, they sat in silence, and James realized that the princess was choosing her words carefully. She began by thanking him directly and sincerely, her voice carrying genuine emotion rather than formal politeness. She explained that she had served in various capacities for decades and had always understood intellectually that protection officers put themselves at risk for the royal family. However, experiencing such a direct and immediate intervention had given her a new appreciation for the split-second decisions these officers must make. She wanted him to know that she understood the weight of the responsibility he carried every day. James, uncomfortable with praise, tried to deflect by saying again that he had simply done his job. Princess Anne smiled at this, a knowing expression that suggested she had expected exactly that response. She told him that she had read his service record and knew about his military background, his years of dedication, and his perfect record of service. She also knew that he had a daughter he rarely got to see because of his demanding schedule and the requirements of his position. This caught James by surprise. He had not expected Princess Anne to know such personal details about his life. His daughter Emma lived in Scotland with her mother, and the distance combined with his irregular work hours meant he only saw her a few times a year. It was one of the deep regrets of his life, a personal sacrifice that came with his career choice. Emma was 12 years old now, growing up quickly, and he knew he was missing important moments in her life. Princess Anne went on to explain that she wanted to do something meaningful to thank him, something that went beyond official commendations and formal letters. She had arranged for him to receive a week of paid leave, and she had also taken the liberty of contacting his ex-wife to suggest that Emma might enjoy a visit to London. If James was interested, arrangements could be made for him to spend quality time with his daughter, perhaps showing her some of the historical sights of London. Giving them a chance to reconnect, James felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. This was not a grand gesture or a public award. It was something deeply personal and thoughtful, something that showed Princess Anne had taken the time to understand what would truly matter to him. He managed to thank her, his voice rougher than usual. Anne simply nodded, understanding that some things were difficult to put into words. Meanwhile, Tom Parker Bowles was dealing with his own emotional aftermath from the incident. Despite being cleared of any wrongdoing, he felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and responsibility. He had nightmares about the accident, replaying the moment when his car accelerated out of control, imagining all the terrible things that could have happened. His passion for racing, which had been such a joy in his life, was now tainted by fear and trauma. His mother, Queen Camilla, tried to console him during private family moments. She reminded him that accidents happen and that the important thing was that everyone was safe. However, she also understood that her son needed to process his emotions in his own way and in his own time. Tom withdrew from public appearances for several weeks, avoiding social media and declining invitations to events. He needed space to heal from the psychological impact of the near tragedy. Tom wrote a personal letter to Princess Anne, expressing his deep regret and gratitude that she had not been harmed. He also asked if there was any way he could personally thank James Mitchell for his quick action. And always pragmatic, suggested that the best way Tom could move forward was to become an advocate for better safety standards in amateur racing events. She believed that transforming the incident into something positive would be more valuable than dwelling on guilt. Taking this advice to heart, Tom began working with racing safety organizations. He shared his experience publicly, speaking honestly about the mechanical failure and the terrifying moments when he realized he had lost control of his vehicle. He became involved in fundraising for improved safety equipment and better training programs for amateur racers. His candid discussions about the incident and his ongoing emotional recovery helped reduce the stigma around acknowledging fear and trauma, and motorists responded positively to Tom's advocacy work. Other drivers came forward to share their own close calls and experiences with mechanical failures. Manufacturers began reviewing their safety protocols and inspection procedures. The incident, which could have ended in tragedy, instead became a catalyst for meaningful improvements in safety standards across amateur racing events in the United Kingdom. James Mitchell's week with his daughter Emma turned out to be one of the most precious times of his life. They explored London together, visiting museums and historical sites. Emma was at an age where she was developing her own interests and opinions, and James discovered sides of his daughter he had never known. She loved art and history, asking thoughtful questions about the exhibits they saw. She had her mother's quick wit and her own unique sense of humor that made James laugh in ways he hadn't in years. During a quiet moment in a cafe near the British Museum, Emma asked her father about the incident with Princess Anne. She had seen some of the news coverage and had been worried about him. James tried to explain his job in a way she could understand, talking about responsibility and duty and the importance of being prepared for unexpected moments. Emma listened carefully, then said something that James would never forget. She told him she was proud of him, not just for saving Princess Anne, but for being someone who helped protect others every day. Those simple words from his daughter meant more to James than any medal or commendation could. He realized that while his job had cost him time with Emma, it had also taught him values he had passed on to her. She understood service and dedication in a way that many children her age did not. The sacrifice had not been without purpose, even if it had been painful. When James returned to work after his week off, he found that his life had changed in subtle but significant ways. His colleagues treated him with a new level of respect, though they were careful not to make him uncomfortable with excessive praise. His supervisors offered him opportunities for advancement, suggesting he might consider training new recruits or taking on a more senior role in the protection service. These offers forced James to think about his future in ways he had been avoiding. He was approaching 50 years old, an age when many protection officers began transitioning to less physically demanding roles. His body still performed well, but he knew from experience that reflexes naturally slowed with age. The incident with Princess Anne had required split-second timing. He wondered honestly how many more years he could maintain that level of performance. The thought of stepping back from active protection duty felt like losing part of his identity, yet he knew it was something he would eventually need to consider. Princess Anne continued her royal duties without any visible change in her demeanor or schedule. To those who knew her well, this was entirely expected. She had faced challenges and dangers throughout her life and had never been one to dwell on what-ifs or might-have-beens. However, those closest to her noticed that she had developed an even deeper appreciation for the protection officers who accompanied her to various engagements. She made a point of learning their names and occasionally asking about their families and interests. The relationship between Anne and James remained professional, as it had to be given their respective roles. However, there was now an unspoken bond of mutual respect that went beyond the formal structure of their professional relationship. When James was on duty protecting her at various events, Anne would occasionally catch his eye and offer a small nod of acknowledgement. These brief moments of connection were worth more than any public ceremony or formal recognition. 6 months after the incident at Silverstone, his life had settled into a new normal for everyone involved. The intense media attention had faded, replaced by other news stories and royal events. However, the ripples from that brief moment of danger continued to spread outward in ways both large and small, changing the lives of those who had been present that day. James Mitchell, had accepted a position as head trainer for the Royal Protection Service. It had not been an easy decision. Part of him wanted to remain in active field duty, to continue the work he had done for 15 years. However, conversations with his daughter Emma and some honest self-reflection had helped him see that this new role was not a step down, but rather a different kind of service. He could use his experience and knowledge to prepare the next generation of protection officers, ensuring they were ready for their own split-second moments when they came. His first class of trainees was a diverse group of 12 men and women, all highly qualified but relatively inexperienced in royal protection work. On their first day, James stood before them in the training facility and told them about the incident at Silverstone. He did not frame it as a story of heroism, but as a lesson in awareness and preparation. He emphasized that protection work was not about glory or recognition, but about constant vigilance and the willingness to act without hesitation when needed. He walked the trainees through his thought process during those crucial seconds. He explained how years of training had allowed him to recognize the danger and respond instinctively. He talked about the importance of positioning, of always knowing where your principal was and what potential threats existed in any environment. Most importantly, he stressed that protection officers needed to trust their instincts. If something felt wrong, it probably was wrong, and there was no shame in being overly cautious. The trainees listened with rapt attention. They had all read about the incident, of course, but hearing James describe it in his own words brought it to life in a different way. One young officer named Sarah Chen asked a question that many of them were thinking. She wanted to know how James had managed to act so quickly without freezing or second-guessing himself. It was the kind of response time that seemed almost superhuman, and she wondered if it was something that could truly be taught, or if it was simply innate talent. James considered the question carefully before answering. He explained that while some people might naturally have faster reflexes than others, the real key was mental preparation. Protection officers had to visualize potential scenarios constantly, running through possible threats and their responses in their minds. This mental rehearsal meant that when an actual emergency occurred, the response pathway was already established in their brain. The body simply followed the plan that the mind had already practiced dozens or hundreds of times. He also admitted something that surprised many of the trainees. He told them that he still had moments of doubt and fear when he replayed the incident in his mind. He wondered if he could have moved faster, if there had been other actions he should have taken, if he had been fortunate rather than skilled. This vulnerability from their instructor, this admission that even experienced officers questioned themselves, was valuable in its own way. It taught the trainees that self-doubt was normal and that the goal was not to eliminate fear, but to act despite it. Princess Can had resumed her full schedule of royal engagements, which was typically one of the busiest among all royal family members. She attended charity events, military ceremonies, agricultural shows, and diplomatic receptions. Her reputation for being hardworking and dedicated had always been strong. But after the Silverstone incident, there seemed to be renewed public appreciation for her commitment to duty. People remembered that she had faced a frightening situation with grace and had immediately shown concern for others rather than focusing on her own close call. At one event, a children's hospital visit, a young patient asked Anne if she was scared when the car almost hit her. The adults in the room tensed, unsure how the princess would respond to such a direct question. Anne knelt down to the child's level and answered honestly. She said that she had been surprised more than scared, and that the important thing was that everyone stayed safe. She also told the child that being brave did not mean never feeling afraid, but rather knowing what to do when scary things happen. It was a simple answer, but it resonated with everyone who heard it. Tom Parker Bowles had found new purpose through his safety advocacy work. What had started as a way to process his guilt and trauma had evolved into a genuine passion. He had connected with engineers and safety experts to better understand the mechanical failure that had caused his accident. Armed with this knowledge, he began working with amateur racing organizations to develop better pre-race inspection protocols. His insider status as both a racing enthusiast and a member of the extended royal family gave him a unique platform to advocate for. changes, he organized a fundraiser to provide better safety equipment for young people interested in motorsports. The event was held at the same Silverstone circuit where the incident had occurred. This was a deliberate choice on Tom's part, a way of confronting the place that held such difficult memories. Princess Anne attended the fundraiser, a gesture that meant a great deal to Tom. Her presence signaled forgiveness and support, allowing Tom to truly begin moving past the guilt he had carried. During the fundraiser, Tom and Princess Anne spoke privately for the first time since the immediate aftermath of the incident. Tom thanked her again for her understanding and for suggesting he channel his experience into positive action. Anne, in her typically straightforward manner, told him that dwelling on what could have happened was pointless. What mattered was what they chose to do with the experience. She appreciated his work on safety improvements and believed it would prevent similar incidents in the future. James Mitchell attended the fundraiser as well, though he tried to remain in the background. Tom sought him out specifically to thank him in person. Their conversation was brief but meaningful. Tom expressed his gratitude not just for James's quick action, but for the professionalism and discretion he had shown in the aftermath. Unlike some people who might have sought publicity from such an incident, James had simply returned to his work. Tom respected that deeply, and he wanted James to know it. The conversation between James and Tom was observed by several photographers, and images of the two men shaking hands appeared in newspapers the next day. The photos captured something important: a moment of genuine human connection between two men from very different backgrounds, who had been brought together by extraordinary circumstances. One man had acted to prevent harm, the other had lived with the knowledge that his actions, however unintentional, could have caused terrible harm. Now both were moving forward, changed by the experience but not defined by it. Emma, James's daughter, had started writing letters to her father more regularly after their week together in London. She was getting older and better at expressing herself in writing. Her letters were full of details about school, her friends, her dreams for the future. She had started a project at school about different careers, and she had chosen to research royal protection work. Her teacher had been impressed by the depth of her research and the obvious pride she took in understanding what her father did for a living. James kept every letter Emma sent him in a box in his flat. On difficult days when the training was challenging or when he missed active field duty, he would reread them. They reminded him of why he had made the choices he had, both in accepting the new training position and in dedicating his career to protection service. The sacrifices had been real and significant, but they had also given his daughter a father she could be proud of, and an example of dedication and service. The investigation into the mechanical failure that caused Tom's car to malfunction had concluded with several recommendations for improved safety standards. The specific component that had failed was relatively rare, but investigators found that similar parts in other racing vehicles showed signs of wear that had not been detected. During routine inspections, new testing protocols were developed to check for the kind of stress fractures that had led to the failure. These changes were implemented across amateur racing circuits throughout the country. A year after the incident, a small private ceremony was held to present James Mitchell with the Royal Victorian Medal. This honor, given for personal service to the monarchy, was presented by Princess Anne herself. The ceremony was attended only by senior protection service officials and a few members of James's family, including Emma, who had traveled from Scotland for the occasion. There were no media present, no public announcements. It was exactly the kind of recognition James would have chosen if given the option. During the brief ceremony, Princess Anne spoke about the importance of duty and service. She noted that protection officers like James worked in the shadows, often going unrecognized for their dedication and sacrifices. She said that while this particular incident had brought James's work into public view, it represented just one moment in a career full of such moments, most of which no one would ever know about. She thanked him not just for his actions that day at Silverstone, but for every day of his service. After receiving the medal, James was invited to say a few words. He kept his remarks brief, as was his nature. He thanked Princess Anne for her kindness and understanding. He acknowledged his colleagues in the protection service, noting that any of them would have done the same thing in his position. He spoke about the importance of training and preparation, his hope that his work with new recruits would help ensure the safety of the royal family for years to come. Finally, he thanked his daughter Emma for understanding the demands of his job and for making him want to be better at everything he did. Emma sat in the audience, trying not to cry, as she watched her father receive the honor. She was old enough now to truly understand the significance of what he did and the risks he faced. She knew that her father was not perfect, that his job had meant missing birthdays and school events, that their time together had been limited. But she also knew that he was a good man who had dedicated his life to protecting others. That knowledge filled her with a pride that was almost overwhelming. Tom Parker Bowles watched the ceremony from the back of the room. Having been invited by Princess Anne, his presence was a reminder of the interconnected nature of the event that had brought everyone together. He had not returned to competitive racing, finding that his new work in safety advocacy was more fulfilling than he had expected. He had discovered that making a positive difference in the racing community gave him a sense of purpose that was deeper than the thrill of speed. The years that followed saw all the principal figures in the story continue to evolve and grow. James thrived in his role as head trainer, developing a reputation for producing some of the best-prepared protection officers in the service. His relationship with Emma deepened as she entered her teenage years. They spoke on the phone regularly, and she visited London more frequently. The lost time could never be fully recovered, but they were building new memories and a stronger bond. Princess Anne continued her tireless work on behalf of various charities and organizations. The incident at Silverstone became just one of many stories in her long career of public service. However, those who knew her well noticed that she seemed to have a renewed energy and commitment. Facing danger directly had reminded her of the preciousness of life and the importance of making every day count. She approached her duties with the same dedication as always, but perhaps with a slightly deeper appreciation for the people who made her work possible. Tom's safety advocacy work grew beyond his initial expectations. He was invited to speak at international motorsports conferences, sharing his experience and the lessons learned from the incident. His willingness to speak openly about the trauma and fear he had experienced helped change conversations about mental health in racing communities. Other drivers felt more comfortable acknowledging their own fears in close calls, leading to better support systems and counseling services in the sport. The silver racing car that had been involved in the incident was eventually restored and placed in a private collection, though Tom never drove it again. For him, it served as a reminder of a day that changed his life in profound ways. It was a symbol of both the dangers of motorsports and the resilience of the human spirit, of how a moment of terror could be transformed into years of meaningful work and personal growth. The bond between James Mitchell and Princess Anne, though it remained professional and rarely required direct interaction in James's training role, had created a subtle shift in how the protection service operated. James's insights from years of field experience informed new training protocols. His emphasis on mental preparation and instinctive response became cornerstones of the program. Future protection officers benefited from lessons learned in that split second at Silverstone, even if many of them never knew the full story behind the training methods they learned. As time passed, the incident gradually faded from public memory, replaced by new events and stories. However, for those directly involved, it remained a defining moment that had shaped their paths in lasting ways. James Mitchell continued to train new officers, passing on not just technical skills but a philosophy of service and readiness. Princess Anne carried forward with her duties, embodying the resilience and grace that had defined her public life. Tom Parker Bowles channeled his experience into work that made motorsports safer for future generations. And Emma Mitchell grew into young adulthood with a deep understanding of service, sacrifice, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The lightning-fast act of bravery that had pulled Princess Anne from danger had rippled outward, touching many lives and creating connections that would last for years to come. It was a reminder that single moments can have profound and lasting impacts, that preparation and training can make the difference between tragedy and survival, and that how people respond to crisis reveals their true character. In the end, the story was not just about one man's quick reflexes, but about how a community of people transformed a frightening incident into opportunities for growth, healing, and positive change.